show me my respect and bow down.
You get to decide what kind of king you are going to be.
Hi folks, I'm Ignatiy Vishnevetsky.
And I'm Alex Dowd.
Today we're talking about the new Marvel superhero movie, Black Panther.
Welcome to Film Club.
So the character of Black Panther, his real name is T'Challa. He's played by Chadwick Boseman. He is the crown prince of a fictional, futuristic African kingdom called Wakanda, which has basically isolated itself from the world for centuries, maybe even thousands of years. They have massive deposits of this fantastical element called vibranium, which is a pretty important resource in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which they've basically used to build a society that's always about a century ahead of the rest of the world. And as soon to be their king, he's ascending to the mantle of the Black Panther, the kind of the champion, the protector of the kingdom. He wears a clawed super suit. He fights something. The film isn't very clear on what the role of the Black Panther is, aside from kind of a symbolic defender of his country. The character first appeared in Captain America: Civil War,
Right.
and there he comes off as this kind of interesting foil to the chumminess of the rest of the MCU. But this film, which is directed by Ryan Coogler, who also wrote and directed Creed, Fruitvale Station, develops him significantly.
Yes, and it also, I will say that if he's sort of the odd man out in Civil War, this one builds a whole ensemble around him of these very rich supporting characters.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about this film, one of the ways it breaks with what we've kind of learned to accept as the Marvel formula, is that it features absolutely none of its kind of established roster of superheroes.
Yeah, there are no cameos. Ant-Man doesn't show up to remind you of the Avengers. You know?
They don't randomly go to Doctor Strange's house on the way to something else.
I mean, they don't even mention those characters. You know?
And even in flashbacks to events from Civil War, they don't show anyone except Black Panther.
I mean, I think it's trying to be as self-contained as one of these films can be, and that's a tall order for a Marvel film, because this whole studio, which has now been making films for 10 years now, all hits, every single one of them hits. This is number 18, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, they've sort of built the foundation of their company strategy on reminding you that other movies exist, you know? But this one, it feels about as self-contained as one of these things can be, and I think that's one of the many reasons that it's one of the better Marvel films.
Or at least one of the most dramatically compelling.
Yeah.
Because the story is very focused on Wakanda and what it is supposed to be, what it's supposed to mean. And so you have this setting that is very literally hidden from the rest of the Marvel world, which allows it to tell a very self-contained story.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the ensemble. The cast here is one of the film's strengths.
Yeah.
Because Black Panther's conflict is kind of internal. You know, T'Challa is a very steely, very confident character. So they mostly just play him off of other, characters who tease him, characters who tell him that he has to be more generous or that he has to be tougher. But really, the center of the film is the villain.
Yes. Black Panther really fixes one of the reoccurring problems with Marvel movies is that they often don't have a compelling villain. And the villain in this film is terrific and complicated. He's played by Michael B. Jordan, who also starred in Coogler's other two films, in Creed and as well as Fruitvale Station. And I don't want to say too much about his biography because that sort of unfolds throughout the film. He's a kind of reworking of a character from the comics called Killmonger, and that makes him sound very cartoonish. But the movie gives this character a lot of dimension, and one of the things I think that makes a really interesting supervillain is, or can make a really interesting one, is that kind of on a bad day, you can see yourself being brought around to his way of thinking, you know? And I think that that's absolutely the case with this character, who reminded me most, sort of in the Marvel pantheon of villains, of somebody like Magneto, who has some very real reasons to be upset, we'll say, with the world, and whose philosophy about the world is one that is persuasive at times.
And it helps that Jordan is a very charismatic presence.
Yes.
I mean, he has a much more obvious magnetism than, say, Boseman, who plays kind of our lead character.
More emotional too.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a more emotional character than Black Panther. Black Panther is, you're right, that steely is a good word for him. He is, in some respects, a little bit of a cipher, whereas everyone around him is sort of filling in those emotional gaps. And you have a villain who, I mean, there are moments that I found overwhelmingly emotional in this movie, and they almost all have to do with the villain.
I have heard some people kind of refer to this movie as one of those films where every character is really interesting except for the protagonist. But I do think there is some dramatic savviness to the way it's constructed, because T'Challa is a character who has been basically raised from birth to be the leader of this country, and to be extremely confident and to be cool under pressure. And so what the film kind of does is give his internal conflicts over to absolutely everyone else, and maybe even to some degree to Killmonger. He's mostly referred to as Eric in this film. Something he has in common with Magneto.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. Yep.
There's another Eric with a K.
Yep.
And yeah, we don't want to get too much into the plot here, but I do think
And there's a lot of it.
And it is. It's a it's a film that honestly feels like like a year's worth of issues. And I think that's one of the reasons why it feels more like a comic book. Narratively, it feels like a comic book.
But there's other influences too. I mean, I see. There's definitely some James Bond in it. There's a lot. There's a Q character. His little sister, who provides him with all this fantastic technology.
And an entire, basically, James Bond sequence where they go to a casino in South Korea.
And then there's a car chase that's very James Bond. You could see that playing out in a Bond film. I think there's a little bit of Star Wars in it too, in the conception of Wakanda, and there's sort of a Jedi council in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the plotting is like an Earth-set space opera.
Yeah,
we have to introduce all these factions because Wakanda is, while it is one kingdom, it's actually 5 very different tribes, one of which doesn't even fully accept the authority of Wakanda's government. And that's actually one of its kind of interesting ideas. Wakanda is one of Marvel's, as the comic books, is one of Marvel's most intriguing and fascinating fictional settings.
I wish we got a little bit more of it, I'll say.
And
that's
I'll
one of the
agree with
things.
you. Yeah. Because as though you get these neat costumes and ideas of production design, which range from this kind of like these mountain fortresses to this mine that looks like a Bond villain's lair, to basically break with this military and industrial aesthetic that is kind of become the defining look of Marvel. We don't really see as much of it as I think would be interesting. I think.
Yeah, I mean, what's it like to be a normal Wakandan living in this city? We don't know.
Yeah, it often seems kind of small, and I feel like if we saw more of it, it would only help. I mean, it would just be more evocative of the world that these characters are struggling over.
For sure. And the action scenes aren't great either. I think the CGI is a little weak, but I mean that's true of most of the Marvel films. There are really only a very small handful where the action is what is the best thing about it, like Doctor Strange, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I like the casino and the chase. The whole South Korean sequence is, I think, one of Marvel's better action set pieces.
Yeah.
But you're right, this is a film where, especially toward the end, the effects are often really spotty, I think even by Marvel's standards.
For sure. I mean, I do think this thing it's so important representationally, too. I mean, the fact that not just that we have a giant blockbuster with a black superhero, but one with an entire, where most of the cast is black actors. And it's
a very large cast.
Yes, it is. And all very good. And the movie acknowledges that role as well. I mean, this is definitely a movie that explicitly gets into the idea where you have young kids, young black kids looking up to these characters.
But it also, in some ways, confronts that utopian fantasy. I mean, it doesn't go all the way with confronting it, but it does get at some tension and conflict in it, and this idea of this fantasy as being completely removed from the realities of the real world.
Yeah.
And that's at the center of the film's conflict.
Yeah.
But getting back to the effects, they're weak in some places, and it isn't the most spectacular looking film that this this mega franchise has produced, even though it's in some ways less monotonous looking than a lot of other Marvel, less samey than a lot of Marvel films. I feel like it's in some ways the least effects driven film.
Yeah, I mean, there are moments that play like a Shakespearean drama.
Yeah, there are large stretches of this film without a lot of super heroic action.